Good morning, Don. So good to see you. Welcome to Queerly Beloved.
I was looking forward to this interview, Will,
Oh, I'm so glad.
knowing something about your history and involvement in the gay community
Well,
and
thank you.
the insightfulness with which you ask questions.
I
I'm
appreciate
looking forward to this interview.
I appreciate that so
And
much.
I see it more as a dialogue than
Mm,
an interview.
well, thank you. That means so much, especially coming from you and your remarkable history in the LGBTQ community. And we'll see if there's time for me to add my 2 cents, but I've got so much that I want to hear from you. So we will see, but I'm certainly excited for it to be a conversation. And I just am aware that there's so much that I want to hear from you. So thank you for making the time to do this. It's really an honor and a pleasure.
I enjoy intergenerational dialogues.
And it's so important for our
Yes,
community. I feel like
yes.
one of the things that our community lacks, and one of the things that I've seen you taking an initiative to solve, to create some alchemy around, is that the lack of intergenerational connection in our community.
Indeed, the last 20 years of my life has been devoted in part
Mm,
to facilitating um, intergenerational dialogue and trying to eliminate the age apartheid that we find in the gay community,
mm,
that generations aren't talking to each other.
mm,
And a healthy community will always have a sense of youth, adults, elders, ancestors, and the interdependence of these different age groups with each other. Elders need youth the same way youth need elders.
mm. Yeah, I wonder, Don, I just actually returned from a trip with my family, with my extended family. And, there are multiple generations on this trip. We all went to Yellowstone and Grand Tetons together. And it was this, very beautiful experience of being with people from multiple generations. And so I imagine that part of that age apartheid is the fact that we as queer people often relate to our chosen families, right, in our communities, and with our bloodline families, there's more of that. There's more of the connection between the intergenerations. And I wonder, is that where you see the cause of the as you describe it, age apartheid, or is it something else that's keeping us in the gay community from being connected generationally, intergenerationally?
We have to remember that the primary purpose of heterosexuality, from
Mm,
an evolutionary biology point of view,
mhm,
is the reproductive survival of our
mm,
species. They do it well.
mhm,
And in that construct is a culture based on raising children,
mhm,
schools, what have you. Now, we as gay people have only had about 50 years in the United States, 50 years of consciously creating a community.
mm.
So it isn't like we're doing something wrong or it's not there, it's we have to create it.
Yes.
And so that out of gay liberation, I think it's come an understanding of intergenerational importance.
Mhm,
And we have children just as heterosexuals have children. It's not biological. Heterosexuality is based on a hetero or a biological centric understanding. We, as in my opinion, we as gay people, our connection, our role in society is something else.
mm,
And we have a spiritual responsibility to our young.
mm,
And it's being fulfilled here and there.
mm,
Not very well, but here and there it is happening. And there's certainly more of that today than there was in the past.
mm. Okay, I've got follow-up questions, but I wanted
I know. After 55 years of continually studying this and being part of manifesting this,
Mm.
Sometimes that experience gets in the way.
No, it's beautiful. It's like there's just an overflow of wisdom and a wealth of knowledge that wants to be poured out, or and that I want to drink from, and that I want my listeners to drink from. So it's all
It's a
beautiful.
two-way street.
Awesome.
Your enthusiasm enlivens me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
So,
a two-way street. It's always a two-way street intergenerationally.
mm, so my listeners expect a question up front, and so I want to make sure that I get it in there, which is to tell me who you are, Don, in this moment in your life, on this day, on this planet, in this body. But tell me who you are by describing a perfect drag avatar that embodies that. And if you'd like, I can go first, if that's helpful.
I would be interested. I do have someone in mind, but I'd love to hear who embodies that for you.
Okay, yes. So just breathing into what I'm feeling in this moment, and there's such an excitement in my heart. You just used the word enthusiasm, and that is absolutely how I'm feeling. I'm in this energy of enthuse. And so my
What
drag.
that means, that word comes, enthusiasm. The end part means enthusiasm comes from theo.
Mm.
The spirit is within you. The spirit of the divine is in you when you have enthusiasm.
Oh, yes, yes. And I feel that spirit in me.
I do too.
And so my drag avatar that embodies that, it's a bright pink energy. It's very joyous and celebratory and spring-like. And so it is, as I say that, it's like a sprite. It's a sprite energy. So I'm this like bright sprite with sort of like a spiky pink hair, and the twittering wings that are just so energized and excited to to drink from this nectar and to smell this flower and to move around and explore and discover. So that would be my drag avatar, this enthusiastic.
You're a radical fairy.
I am a radical fairy, yes.
Yes, I can sense that. Have you ever been to a radical fairy gathering?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah, I love the Fae. My main sanctuary is Destiny, and we do a Lammas gathering where we produce a play. And we have skipped it for the last few years because of COVID. It's happening this year, which I'm so thrilled about. I'm not sure that I'm going to make it, but doing that play, we do it on top of the mountain, and full production, costumes, scripts. It's written by one of the Fae. And so I'm often cast as the ingenue, often cast as one of the female leads, which has always been a joy. But yeah, the fairy magic is alive in me, and something that has given me so much life. So
I love your enthusiasm.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm excited to talk about the fairies. But before we get into all this juicy stuff, what would your drag avatar for the day be?
I don't know if I would call it an avatar, but I would say one of the models of a gender fluid person that I've always loved is the singer Sylvester.
Yes.
Who grew up in Los Angeles, came to his stardom through the Cockettes in San Francisco, and himself as a musician. I always liked I just always liked his mannerisms. I liked his political consciousness. I liked his connection to the community. So one of the models for me would be Sylvester. One of the gender fluid models for me would be Sylvester.
Love that. What's your favorite Sylvester song?
My favorite one?
Song by Sylvester.
It's been a long time since I've listened to them.
Yeah.
I can't name one offhand.
Okay, yeah.
At 85, sometimes one's memory gets a little.
No problem. We'll see if we can.
But let me just say, what I loved about him was his mannerisms, how he was truly queer, how he was truly a radical fairy, truly gender fluid, truly beautiful to look at, beautiful in terms of hearing him, beautiful in terms of his commitment to a community,
Mm.
particularly with the beginning of the AIDS pandemic.
Hmm. Was he around during the Radical Faeries? Did he ever show up at a gathering?
To the best of my knowledge, he hasn't. But, you know, one of the things about the Radical Faeries, Harry Hay and I made sure from the beginning that the Radical Faeries would be decentralized.
Mm-hmm.
There's no Radical Faerie Pope.
Mm-hmm.
So that things are happening with Radical Faeries all over the world. Mm-hmm. And every now and then, I'll get an email cluing me into what's happening in Australia or Thailand or Europe or on and on and on. Sure. And so I really don't know if Sylvester showed up at a Radical Faerie gathering.
Yeah. But
there's so much going on that one person can't keep it all track of it all.
Yeah. Well, one of the favorite songs for me is "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real."
Yeah, it's like I know the song. I love it. Thank you for reminding me of it.
Mighty real.
Well, I see Sylvester has influenced you also.
Oh, for sure. And I love that message, right?
What did you like about it?
I love also just their energy and their unabashed queerness during that time. And they were huge, you know, they were adored and celebrated in such a beautiful way. And in that way, I'd say a revolutionary towards our acceptance, you know, and our capacity to be celebrated role models for folks to be all of who they are, to be their authentic selves. I mean, yeah, Sylvester's a hero of our movement for sure.
This coming Wednesday, I'm in my mailing of Gay Tribal Elder that I send out weekly. There will be an article about Sylvester.
Oh, wonderful.
So make sure you read it this Wednesday.
I will, absolutely. So, you know, one of the things you mentioned as we were talking about heterosexual and one of their purpose being to procreate and to create kids. And then you mentioned that, you know, gay people, LGBTQ people have a different purpose. And I know this is a big question, but I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts on what you believe our purpose is.
What I'm suggesting to LGBT people, particularly gay men, where most of my work has been with gay men and queer men, that there's a need for revisioning of what it means to be gay, what that word means. Up until the end of the 19th century, and let's say in Europe, we were called sodomites. It was a negative term. It resulted in our being burned alive at the stake. At the end of the 19th century, came in the scientific study of sex. And for the first time, the words heterosexual and homosexual were used. Heterosexual, good and normal. Homosexual, bad and abnormal. So what we've done is we've allowed hetero supremacy to define who we are, sexual beings, and we have largely lived that out with all kinds of different ways, bathhouses, white parties, you name it, that we think that we are a sex act and our identity comes from that. I would suggest it's hard to develop a self-respecting identity out of a blowjob. I love blowjobs, giving and receiving, but that's not who we are. We know from evolutionary biology that a trait does not remain in a species unless that trait is fulfilling some evolutionary purpose. As long as we've had written records, there have been people like you and me around. The very first epic in Western literature is the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh, the king, falls in love with Enkidu, and much of the epic revolves around their relationship. Get it? 3000 BC in Egypt, There's a glyph that talks about two men living together as a couple. They were part of the pharaoh's entourage, and the person that's talked about in the glyph was the pharaoh's hairdresser. Wow. We've been around for a long time, doing certain roles for a long time. And so I think it is the task of our generation, the new generation, actually, an up-and-coming generation, is to begin to look at gay identity in a new way that is less about assimilation and sexual orientation, and more about something essential that we're doing, essentialism, and social contribution. E.O. Wilson, one of the great evolutionary biologists, had written in a Pulitzer Prize-winning book called On Human Nature, quote, homosexuals may be the rare carriers of the altruistic impulse in the human species, unquote. You get that? Quote, homosexuals may be the rare carriers of the altruistic impulse in the human species. He doesn't talk about erogenous zones. He doesn't talk about sex acts. He says there's something else that we're doing. And a little science that came up to say your internet connection is unstable.
That's okay.
Nothing personal. Anyways, Joan Roughgarden, a professor at Stanford University, has written a book called Evolution's Rainbow, where she looks not only at LGBTQ people, humans, but she looks at us in other species. And she says, we carry the cooperative principle in the human species. Again, she says nothing about sex, but she says there's something now. So E.O. Wilson talks about altruism, idealism. Joan Roughgarden talks about the cooperative principle. You get it? It's as enjoyable as sex is. We've been looking at the tail wagging the dog, and we haven't been paying attention to the dog. So that's why I'm saying there needs to be a revisioning of what it means to be gay. It has to come from us. Heterosexuals cannot do it for us, although they can be allies and help us, like E.O. Wilson. But we have to do the hard work of identifying what it is that we're contributing to society. And then we need to be able to communicate that understanding to the dominant culture. We are here for a purpose. We're here for a purpose. There is meaning to being gay. Anyways,
wow, no, that's so beautiful.
I'd love to reactions to that.
I'd love to, stay swimming in this sea of purpose. And what I see as two ships within the sea are this altruistic impulse and this cooperative principle. So I wonder, to flush that out, where could we go with that? So perhaps our purpose is around cooperation and altruism as our starting point. And to me, that means
not as a selling point.
A starting
point of explanation.
Yeah.
A selling point?
No, starting point.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. So my thought is that, and I'm curious how this resonates with you, and curious to hear your thoughts, but it's our role as peacemakers, our role as unifiers. It's interesting in this time we're in now. I was just listening to a little thing by an incredible drag queen in San Francisco that I love, Juanita Moore, and she was talking about the United States, and questioning that word united. When you hear about all these laws being passed, challenging our rights, and this recent decision around affirmative action, and just how we might be as a country forgetting this united piece of United States.
And absolutely.
I wonder if that is part of our purpose, is to be the medicine that unites people, the medicine that unites different communities and builds bridges among.
Well, you get this.
Mm.
You get this. Absolutely. It's a
Mm.
delight to hear you talking like that.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah, yeah, you get this.
you.
That we're doing something that makes us important, that every generation keep reappearing, even though it logically doesn't make sense. Heterosexuals are creating us. There's something in our evolutionary trajectory that requires us to be there. And our oppressors, in every instance, goes down the drain pipe of history, whoever those oppressors are, and we keep reappearing. So there's something important that we're doing in terms of the evolution of the human species. Now, we are also found in other species. There's a book called Biological Exuberance, where a gay man has looked at all of the research on species in gay and lesbian appearances and trans appearances in species in peer-reviewed journals. So it's the cream of the crop. He has identified over 300 vertebrate species that have people like that have beings like you and me in them.
Wow.
That are doing something. When I read about the lesbian, I use the word lesbian in quotation marks, the lesbian lizards in Arizona, they remind me of my lesbian friends here in Los Angeles. Wow. When I read about the savanna baboons in Tanzania and the difficulty maintaining monogamous relationships and cheating on their partner, I say, my God, it just sounds like West Hollywood. You get it?
Wow, yeah.
We are appearing in other species. There's a reason why people like you and I are brought into this world. And it involves a change in consciousness on the part of gay people, that we don't reduce ourselves to a sex act or a party animal, but that we're contributing something. I see it around me with, for example, hairdressers, the ancient Egyptian example I gave. Those hairdressers are still here today. Many, many women get counseling from their hairdressers. They get more than just a new hairdo. There's a dialogue that takes place that's helpful to heterosexual. I work as an elder and other ways, as a Jungian depth psychologist and other roles. I work with a lot of young heterosexual men. Here it is, a faggot elder helping these young hetero men to grow into their masculine or manhood in a healthy way. You get it? It isn't like we're doing something important in this culture. When I was in shamanic training with Michael Harner at the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, I would say in my cohort, we did a lot of training. The last one was 3 years of training with Michael. And I would say that probably in a room of 40 people, I would say it probably half or maybe 60% were gay men or lesbians. You get it?
Wow.
That we're drawn to. There's a role that we play as medicine men and medicine women that is recognized by indigenous people. They don't recognize it by a sex act, or we're recognized by a role we play. For example, Malidoma Somé, West African shaman, and has 2 PhDs, one from the Sorbonne, one from Brandeis University. Malidoma says among his people, gender is determined not by the plumbing between your legs, but gender is determined by your vibrations. your vibrational energy.
Wow.
And those with the highest vibrational energy are called gatekeepers. Their role is to keep open the gate between the visible and invisible world. Because if those doorways ever closed, the guard people would no longer exist. You get it? Those gatekeepers are people like you and me, gay and lesbian people, have that higher vibrational energy that they become the gatekeepers. You get what I'm talking about here.
Absolutely.
There's a role that we play that becomes very, very important. And this is recognized in pre-industrial indigenous societies, nature societies.
Beautiful. Yeah, what it makes me think of is when you talk about it from that more spiritual perspective and between the worlds, between the genders, it's more bridges, it's more bridge making, it's more opportunities for unity, more opportunities for the cooperative principle, where we are bridging the physical world with the spiritual world. We are creating cooperation between those things.
Absolutely. In an idealistic, altruistic way.
Yes, in an idealistic
yes.
way. Yeah.
We're not just taking care of our children. We're taking care of all children.
Yes. Whew. I gotta
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Yes.
It's a delight talking with you. You get this. I can tell by looking at your eyes. I can tell you get it.
I feel it in my heart.
You're right.
So one of the things I wanted to make sure I created some space for in our time together was some stories around the fairies, because a lot of Radical Faeries do listen to this podcast, and I don't think many of them have heard it straight from the source's mouth, the origin story. So I'd love it if we could detour from some of these amazing concepts, which I'm sure we'll circle back to, and perhaps it's interwoven within the story. But I'd love to hear about the founding of the Fae.
Well, it's connected. What we were talking about, revisioning gay identity, and the Radical Faeries, there's a connection. Harry, of course, being key to the founding of the Mattachine Society in 1950. And I involved with the Gay Liberation Front of Los Angeles and creating the Gay Community Center in Los Angeles, co-creating it. Harry and I, during the 70s, stayed in contact with each other. He moved to San Juan Pueblo in New Mexico. I was here in LA. Periodically, I would go to San Juan Pueblo. Periodically, he would come to Los Angeles. And whenever we did, we carved out a large amount of time to dialogue with each other. About 1978, I was doing a retreat, a Buddhist meditation retreat and fasting at a Lama, a Sufi community in the San de Cristos Mountains in northern New Mexico, in the mountains above Taos. And Harry came, he and John, showing something called the Symmetricon. And I reconnected with him again. And then after the retreat was over, I went and spent time at San Juan Pueblo. And Harry and I were very disturbed about the direction that the gay movement was going. A decade after Stonewall, that there was more of an assimilationist, heteronormality, electoral politics, gay rights movement, meaning let's change the laws for us, but forget about everybody else. So a liberation movement, a gay liberation movement, was becoming a gay rights movement. And we were concerned about the identity of gay people again. So Harry and I decided, after much dialogue, to call a conference. We looked for a year for the right place and finally found an ashram, remotely located east of Tucson, Arizona, in the desert. And it had been used as a juvenile detention facility. And so it had nice facilities. It had a swimming pool. It was amazing. In the middle of this desert. Here was this ashram, and we sent out the invitation for the gathering. We thought if 25 gay men showed up, we would be lucky. And the gathering was described on the leaflet as exploring the spiritual dimension of being gay, exploring breakthroughs in gay consciousness, which was the stated reason for calling the Radical Faeries into being. So you see the connection between what we were talking about and revisioning gay identity and what Harry and I were trying to do with the Radical Faeries. As it turned out, over 200 gay men from all over North America found their way to this remote location in the desert. And for over Labor Day weekend in 1979, 1979. And it was magical. There was no agenda. We said, you are the raw materials of this gathering. You bring your gifts to this gathering. So let's structure a couple of days where we have a great fairy circle each day, where we all have a chance to get together and share from our heart circle, which we did every morning. And then in the afternoon and evenings, share your gifts with the rest of us, whatever they might be. And so there was a workshop on crocheting. There was a workshop on gemstones. There, on and on and on. And it was all created by us. And it was amazing what gifts we carried. I mean, from A to Z, we were there. And then on the closing night, David Cohen of San Diego, the actor, I don't know if David's still alive or not, but he was a wonderful, wonderful being fairy. And he took the leadership in creating a closing ritual, which was one of the most moving things I've ever experienced. And the day that the gathering ended, we had showed up a week early and baked a lot of bread. And so we gave a loaf of bread to everybody as they were leaving to sustain them on their journey home. And as the last car pulled out of the ashram, a double rainbow formed above the place where we were located. Anyways, as I said to you earlier, we wanted this to be decentralized, that fairies everywhere. Fairies are hard to corral, as you know. And so we said, we're not wanting to do any of that. But we're hoping that fairy gatherings happen all over, and they did. That was in early September of 1979. By late October 1979, there was a fairy gathering in San Francisco. And then there was a fairy gathering outside of Boston. Then there was a fairy gathering, blah, blah, blah. And then you couldn't keep track of them anymore. Because somehow or another, we had tapped in to something that was extremely important to gay men, queer men. And that is, who are we? How do we contribute? So that's the founding story.
So good.
Of the Radical Faeries.
How do you define Radical Faeries?
I don't define it. I don't define it. I let it come out of each person. There's a radical fairy in you, and it's come out today. I can see it. By the smile on your face, by the sparkle in your eye. You get it.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, you get it.
Yeah, it makes sense that there's a resistance, or that we don't want to define it, because part of the foundation of the Radical Faeries is sort of an anti-conformity, right? And a escape from boxes, and so
and an exploration.
Yes,
definitions stand in the way of exploration. Yes. We want people to explore, gay men to explore what it means to be gay.
Yes,
what it means to be queer, and from a gay-centered definition, rather than a hetero definition that's been laid on us by hetero supremacy.
Yes. Whew.
I love that. I love that. I can see the wheels turning in your head.
It's been such a gift for me, Don. So I thank you for that work that you did, for following that impulse, that altruistic impulse to gather men at that time, gay men at that time. It has been a huge part of my spiritual journey, of my personal growth journey, to have access to such an incredible community. And for me, it has really helped me, move out of the heteronormative paradigm and to explore who I truly am. And honestly, not just the heteronormative paradigm, I'd say the homonormative paradigm, right? I think when I first came out, I slipped into just being a gay man as I understood what that was, with, going to bars, multiple nights a week, and going shopping and wearing the right clothes and going to the right parties. And there was a certain new conformity that I escaped heteroconformity, but I stepped into homoconformity. And so I remember my first time, at a Radical Fairy gathering, it was, my eyes were just so open, and my brain,
I get that.
heart expanding, when I realized that I could create something totally new, and something that was so much more authentic to who I am and how I want to express myself and my way of being. And so I thank you and honor you for, planting that seed of re-envisioning what it can mean to be queer, because it has certainly supported
What
me.
you're describing in terms of that homo regimentation, that is what I could never identify with either. I was never, and I've never gone to a white party. Bars had not been a big part of my life. To me, a small part. It wasn't until I was 42 that I went to a bath house, and telling how illiterate I was. I went to a bath house in Reno at 3:00 in the afternoon, and the towel man there said, "You realize there's nobody here until after 10." I
Not much going on at 3 p.m. in Reno's bathhouse. That's so funny. I do want to hear about
How are you? Let me ask you a question. How are you with your biological family, or with other biological family? What role do you play?
Ooh, yeah. Thank you for asking that. So as I mentioned, I just got back from this trip, and a big part of my role is being a child wrangler. I'm constantly, the one who the mom and dad have too many kids, and so one of the babies ends up in my arms, or one of the toddlers becomes under my watch. So that's a big part. And certainly I would say this building of bridges, and gathering people together. My fairy name is Gather, and so I do love gathering my family and finding opportunities for the family to come together and create some of those intergenerational connections within my biological family. But yeah, I have a big, beautiful family that I'm super grateful for. And I'm super grateful for my queer family as well.
My biological family is on the East Coast. Okay. So I had very little contact with their family building. But here on the West Coast in Los Angeles, there was a man by the name of Alan Gross, a heterosexual man, attorney, Century City, that became the legal counsel for the Gay Liberation Front, and then became the legal counsel for the Gay Community Services Center, which is the LA LGBT Center today. And for 25 years, Alan served in that role. I became a good friend of Alan and his wife, Sheila. And when they had their first child, Jeremy, I could see that they were so fatigued. They were so worn out. And so I suggested, how about if maybe on a Saturday evening, I keep Jeremy and you two go out and have some fun. Nice. And they say, oh, that's a great idea. Again, here comes E.O. Wilson with altruism. So here it is that I have no biological children, but I'm helping heterosexuals who are part of my extended family. I'm helping them to raise their children. And a couple of years later came my second child, Heather. And I continue playing that role. And they would go away from for a weekend, and I just move into the house and help to raise these two kids. They'd go to Europe for 2 weeks, and I'd move into the house and pick up the kids.
Wow.
They are both tied up in their jobs and can't pick up the kids after school. I go over, pick up the kids, bring them back to the gay center, and have them play there until 6 o'clock until their parents show up. You get it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I helped to raise two hetero children. I spent the first 18 years of their lives, going to movies with them, helping them with homework, you name it.
Yeah.
As an extended family involving 2 hetero parents, 2 hetero children, and myself. And at the beginning, they would call me Uncle Don. I said, no, I'm not your uncle. I'm not Uncle Don. Well, what do we call you? I said, I'm your fairy godfather. That's why I want to be known as your fairy. And they did that. The kids did that. They introduced me as their fairy godfather.
I love it. That's beautiful.
Anyways, yes.
Yeah, I'm really blessed to have my nephew lives next door. My sister and brother-in-law and my nephew live right next door to me.
How old is your nephew?
We share a gate. He's 11 now, but I've been living here for 6 years. So I've really gotten to be a co-parent in many ways, you know.
Yes, indeed.
I'm picking him up from school or band camp. And, you know, during COVID, I was helping with some of the in-home teaching, and I'd go visit his class and teach the kids improv theater. And so I've really also gotten to have that blessing of parenting without, you know, the full responsibility of parenting. So you know what?
That's something, again, the idea, E.O. Wilson's idea of altruism, and Joan Roughgarden saying, oh, we're doing that in lots of different species, over 300 vertebrates. Oh, wow. And the way it happens, let's say, among seagulls, mama lays the egg, she sits on it and hatches it. It's boring sitting on an egg. Then the father sits on the egg. He gets bored too. Then the queer seagull sits on the egg and helps them out by helping them to hatch the egg. And so they rotate. So there are 3 of them instead of just 1.
Love it.
You get it? We're doing something altruistically.
Yes.
Helping the larger species with raising their young and instilling in them ideals of altruism, cooperation. And those are spiritual qualities. Altruism, idealism, cooperate. Those are spiritual qualities that we're bringing into the culture by what we do, not by what we say, but what we do.
Yeah, and I see that in the fact that these aren't our kids biologically. They're not our responsibility, and there's a bit of an unattachment. It's like their well-being is not a responsibility of ours, and yet we are called to support the community in those ways. We are
it is our
altruistic impulse.
It's different than a hetero parent. That's why I said fairy godfather. Yes. A godfather or godmother. Originally, those roles were meant to be around the spiritual education of the children. Yes. The parents raising these kids have a rough time with just keeping a roof over their heads and food on the table.
Yes.
A godmother or a godfather, a fairy godmother or a fairy godfather, raises these kids with spiritual values because we carry those values. So that's why I was working with Heather and Jeremy Gross's kids, and you're working with your nephew. It happens just naturally.
Yes, beautiful.
Yeah, heterosexuals have their children. We're responsible for all children. And we do that without even knowing it, without being conscious of it. We do it.
Yes. Whew, okay, so I am conscious of time, and I wanted to create some space.
Yes, we have 9 more minutes.
I would love for you to talk about current day, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot at stake right now. There's a lot coming up against the LGBTQ community and our rights. And I know that you are such a very passionate activist and advocate. And I'd love for you to share what you're most present to as some of the risks that we're up against, some of the challenges we're up against, and perhaps to inform the folks who are listening of some of the topics that maybe are not getting the media coverage that they deserve, and even perhaps some ways that folks might be able to support the movement.
Well, one of the advantages I have is I have been in the room or having a front row seat to the evolution of the gay community in Los Angeles over the last 55 years. And history has always been a first love of mine. So I always was absorbing that history. I got involved before there was a community. And one of the things that Gay Liberation did, and in an ancillary way, the Metropolitan Community Church, was developing the concept of a community. And the core element to any community is it assumes responsibility for each other, either to a lesser or greater extent, but basically it's assuming responsibility for each other. That's a new concept for gay people. The idea that we are responsible for each other and each other's welfare. And out of that consciousness, coming out of something called the Gay Survival Committee in the Gay Liberation Front, came the Gay Community Services Center in Los Angeles, the first and largest gay community center in the world. And basic to that was the word gay. We're open about who we are. We're in your face, actually, and we're pretty militant about it. Community. It was seen as a hub around which a community could be formed. Services. We have to be able to give, find out what gay people need, and provide those services. And a center or a hub around which a community could. And it worked. It worked in Los Angeles. It worked in San Diego. It worked in Santa Barbara. It worked throughout the country. So that beginning with gay liberation was grassroots, lots of people involved, and it was community-based. Community becomes central to it. Over the last 50 years, what has happened is something that I'm writing an essay on right now called elite capture. Elite capture, meaning that what has happened, we have moved from a grassroots community-based community to a community in which the elite, and that elite usually involves wealth, usually involves race, white, it usually involves privilege, it usually involves we know what is best for you. You become a spectator rather than a participant in your own history. And so over the last 55 years, that's what's happened to the community. That we no longer have a grassroots participation. We no longer have people like you and me just going out and doing what needs to be done. We're waiting for somebody else to do it. And politically, it's been a failure for us. Elite capture has been a failure. All you have to do is look around. All of these setbacks that are happening during the gay liberation period, that wouldn't have happened. We would have fought back. Today, we're watching it happen. And people don't feel, young people particularly, don't know how to get involved with it. So that one of the big issues today is the decrease in collective action and an increase in elite monopolization of the community. And today, that elite doesn't know what to do. That elite usually throw the money at a problem. And that won't happen with this. One of the things we've seen with the hetero supremacists is they have become a grassroots movement. They have become participants, lots of participants engaged, and we have become spectators to what they're doing. What we need to do is reverse that and move back to a more grassroots, community-based operation with all of us getting involved, doing what all of us can do, whatever our gifts might be, and contributing those gifts to fighting back. It's not going back to gay liberation. It's moving forward, what I call queer liberation, or it might be some other name, but it is a younger generation taking control of what's happening to their lives and developing a more grassroots participatory way of fighting back. And we will win. We have always won. Our oppressors have always gone down the drain pipe. But we have to change the political values by which we're operating, or it won't happen. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it makes so much sense, so much clarity there. And it also makes sense to me that as the capitalism influence of our society builds, that there would be more of a backseat that gay people have taken on the movement, because there's an unattachment. It's like, oh, well, I just watch the news and assume that the people who are paid to do this, right? Paid.
Yes, amen. You got it.
Are going to do the work that needs to be done in order for us to not be, have our rights taken away.
But they're not doing the work.
They're not doing it. Yeah. And so there's
failed.
Disempowerment and also an ignorance that it is up to us, to the people on the ground, to actually step up and do something about it. And,
amen.
And I wonder what it's going to take to turn that dial, to help people, especially the younger generation, who are so unattached. And also this goes back to the age apartheid, right? Is that many people don't know their LGBTQ history to know that that was even a thing that we actually did take to the streets. And so when they don't know that history and have that connection to elders to share the wisdom and the context that this is all happening within, I imagine it's going to be hard for that to click, for them to see what is possible and to feel that motivation to initiate the pushback.
I told you this would not be an interview, it would be a dialogue. That was beautiful to hear you preach. That was beautiful to hear what you had to say. You get this.
Thank you. And
you need to embody that now in the community, that consciousness. Because young people need to hear you, need to hear Will Fisher talking about this, need to hear Don Kilhefner talking about it, needing to hear gay and queer men talking a different language than what they've been propagandized to believe.
So maybe that's the possible beginning to the solution is, yes, more people who are key to this consciousness, who are understanding and aware of this truth, to be speaking out and to get the troops, to call to arms those who are sleeping, who are.
That was beautiful watching you speak. If you would just write down those words that you've said and listen to them, you get this, you understand this. And it's your generation that will have to mentor the young on how to do this, because you know how to do it. You understand it conceptually, and you have the skills to be able to do it, to embody it in the world. It puts a responsibility on the shoulders of your generation and people like you in your generation, just like with my generation. There was a whole a part of a generation where we had to assume a responsibility for fighting back.
Yes.
Creating a clearing in the forest where we could breathe, where we could be ourselves. And that clearing needs to be expanded. And it's your generation and younger people that will do that.
Thank you. Oh,
Yeah, it's now, we've been talking for an hour.
yes. And I had a lot to
As I said to
process.
you, usually after an hour, I begin to wilt.
Mhm.
I need to go eat some popcorn,
Yes, yes,
drink
yes.
a Diet Pepsi.
Yes, yes. But I've been this little sprite. If you're the wilting flower, little
That's right, is what you like.
top of your flower. Well, thank you, Don. This has been an absolute honor and
If you want to, we can
pleasure.
continue this dialogue at some
Very
further
much.
time, but this
Yeah.
has been a truly enjoyable dialogue with you. I
Thank
told you it would be a dialogue.
Yes, thank you, Don. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for all your work.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. All right.
We'll